There is a country that looks like a long corridor of worlds stitched together, where every few hours on the road, the rules change. Limestone reefs turn into mountains. Glaciers scrape valleys clean. Rivers train cities to grow in specific shapes. Volcanoes don't just sit in the background, but keep editing the landscape in real time. That place is Italy. In this episode, we're not chasing a single postcard version of Italy. We're following the spine of the peninsula from the high north to the island edge of the Mediterranean, watching how the land builds the culture and how the culture, in turn, reshapes the land. We'll start in the alpine north, where jagged pale towers rise out of green basins like a broken cathedral, and where wildlife still moves through valleys that feel prehistoric. From there, we'll step into Italy's protected heart in Gran Paradiso, then drift into Venice's Lagoon, a city balanced on water and engineering. We'll trace the Ligurian coast through Cinque Terre, where villages cling to cliffs and terraces hold the line against gravity. We'll cross into Tuscany, through Florence's concentrated genius and the sculpted countryside of Val d'Orcia, then descend into Rome, a city layered so deeply it feels like time became architecture. And then the story turns volcanic. We'll stand in the shadow of Vesuvius with Pompeii and Herculaneum, places where a normal day was sealed into history in a matter of hours. We'll follow the vertical drama of the Amalfi coast, cut inland to the stone labyrinth of Matera, and finally reach Sicily's Mount Etna, where black lava and fertile slopes coexist in the same breath. To close, we'll sail into Sardinia, where granite and sea light up the horizon, and Italy feels like it's slipping into another world entirely. Welcome to Era Trails. And if you love documentaries that blend beauty with meaning, stories that explore not just what a place looks like, but why it became what it is, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps the channel grow, and it keeps you with us for the journeys ahead. We begin at the roofline of the country, where Italy stops being a map and starts being a wall of stone. Our first destination is the Dolomites. We start in the Dolomites, where the Alps stop looking like a continuous wall and start erupting into separate cathedrals of stone. These mountains are a UNESCO World Heritage Site, protected as a serial landscape made up of multiple systems, because the story here is not one valley or one massif, it's the whole architecture of the range. Pale rock towers, vertical faces, deep gorges, and high plateaus cut by ice and water. In places, the cliffs rise more than a kilometer straight up, and the skyline is studded with peaks over 3,000 meters. The Dolomites look otherworldly because they're built from an older world. The rock is dolomite, formed from ancient shallow seas, then lifted, fractured, and carved into blocks, blades, and spires. The landscape holds the fingerprints of glaciers too, with basins, valleys, and steep headwalls shaped by ice, while karst processes work quietly underneath, dissolving and hollowing the carbonate bedrock. It's geology you don't just learn, you feel, because every turn changes the shape of the horizon. And then there's the light. At sunrise and sunset, the walls can ignite into reds and pinks in a phenomenon locals call enrosadira, a name tied to Latin roots that basically means to turn pink. It's the same cliffs, the same ridges, but suddenly the whole range looks alive, like the stone is remembering it used to be coral and sun. Then there's Tre Cime di Lavaredo, 3 blunt towers of rock rising hard into the sky. Cima Grande, Cima Ovest, Cima Piccola. The scale reads instantly, even if you've never stood in the Alps before. And this isn't just a postcard massif, it's also a historic fault line. The area carries World War I history, when these mountains were part of a brutal, high-altitude front. The Dolomites are not only drama and verticality. They also open out into wide, quiet spaces that feel like the mountains are taking a breath. One of the best known is Alpe di Siusi, a high plateau of rolling pastureland that stretches for about 56 square kilometers. It's the kind of place where the foreground is wildflowers and grazing land, and the background is a ring of sharp limestone giants. That contrast is the Dolomites' signature move, softness right up against severity. If you want the roof of this region, you aim for the Marmolada, the highest group in the Dolomites, topped by Punta Pena, which is over 3,300 meters tall. Its glacier is a reminder that even here, in a landscape famous for rock, ice still has a claim. From viewpoints like Punta Rocca, you get that feeling of being suspended above everything. Valleys dropped away, ridgelines layered into the distance, and the Dolomites marching off in every direction like an army of stone. The human side of the Dolomites is easy to miss if you only chase viewpoints. This is one of Italy's borderland mosaics, where language and identity braid together across valleys. Latin, a Rito-Romance language, is still spoken here, and in parts of South Tyrol, it's officially recognized alongside Italian and German. The Dolomites don't just change by elevation, they change by culture as you move through them. And the range is alive in a literal sense. The fauna you're most likely to hear before you see is the marmot, that sharp whistle from the grasslands, plus roe deer in the forest edges and golden eagles working the updrafts. Push higher into rougher ground, and you're in chamois and ibex territory, animals built for cliffs and scree. Even when the peaks look sterile from a distance, the ecosystems here are busy, adapted, and stubborn. If you want to translate all of this into a journey you can actually walk, the Dolomites have a famous spine route, Alta Via 1, a high trail that runs roughly north to south, commonly described as about 125 kilometers, starting near Lago di Brais and ending near Belluno. It's hut-to-hut country, refugee country, the kind of slow travel where the mountains stop being scenery and start becoming your daily weather, your daily distance, your daily respect. That's the Dolomites stone that feels sculpted, light that feels unreal, and a landscape that keeps switching moods without warning. And when we finally leave these pale towers behind, we shift west into a different kind of Italian wilderness where the Alps trade jagged limestone drama for glacial valleys, big mammals, and one of the country's most important protected mountain sanctuaries. Next stop, Gran Paradiso National Park. Leaving the Dolomites behind, the Alps don't get smaller. They get older, rounder, more secretive. And as we slide west into the Gran Alps, Italy quietly reveals one of its purest wild cores, Gran Paradiso National Park, straddling the Aosta Valley and Piedmont, a protected mountain kingdom built around a single stubborn summit. This is a park with a living emblem. If you spend any time here, you start to understand why the alpine ibex became the symbol of Gran Paradiso. Heavy-horned, sure-footed, built for ledges that look impossible from below. And it's not just ibex. The park counts 167 vertebrate species, including 51 mammals and 101 nesting bird species, including raptors that use the valleys like invisible highways. Then there's the botany, which hits you the moment the trail leaves the last stone and wood villages. Gran Paradiso lists 968 plant species, with roughly a quarter considered rare, and it's been declared an important plant area for its botanical richness. Down lower, you get forests, then open larch-dotted slopes, then flowered meadows that look soft until you step off the path and realize the ground is stitched together with roots and rock. Gran Paradiso is often described as Italy's first national park, formally established in 1922, and it carries that first like an origin story. Because before it was a park, it was a rescue mission disguised as privilege. In 1856, King Vittorio Emanuele II declared these mountains a royal hunting reserve, not to open the land, but to control it. And in doing so, he helped prevent the ibex from being wiped out. Guards were created. Access was policed. A whole network of tracks and routes was built into the valleys. It's a strange human contradiction, but it's part of why this place still has teeth today. On the map, the scale is serious. Roughly 70,000 hectares of high mountain terrain, about 703 square kilometers, climbing from valley floors around 800 meters up to 4,061 meters at the summit of Gran Paradiso itself. That peak matters for another reason, too. It's the only mountain over 4,000 meters whose summit is entirely within Italian territory. In a range where borders slice through ridgelines, Gran Paradiso is fully, stubbornly, Italy's. Geologically, you feel the park's age in the bones of it. Much of this massif is built from metamorphic rock like gneiss, with layers that began as older intrusions and sediments then got crushed, heated, and reworked by the slow violence of mountain building. In places you also get calcareous schists derived from ancient marine sediments. The result is a landscape that fractures into slabs, ledges, and steep-sided bowls, perfect for ice to carve and for animals to vanish into. And ice really did the sculpting. The classic Gran Paradiso look is glacial. U-shaped valleys, hanging basins, polished rock, and moraine ridges that read like the park's old handwriting. You can still see that glacial logic in the way trails rise, forest to pasture, pasture to stone, stone to snow. If you want one single visual moment to define Gran Paradiso, take the road up through the Orco Valley toward Cerro Reale, then climb to the Col del Nivole Plateau, around 2,600 meters. Up there, the landscape opens into a high, wide roof of the world, with lakes and tundra-like grass, and the Massif sitting in the distance like a pale wall. It's not a dramatic spirescape like the Dolomites. It's something calmer and more absolute, like the mountains have stopped performing and started simply existing. Gran Paradiso also has a gentler way of teaching you what protected really means. It's not just rules on paper, it's continuity. On one side, the park runs through 5 valleys, each with its own rhythm of villages, refuges, and trailheads, and each valley gives you a different angle on the same giant heart of rock and ice. On the other side of the ridge, it connects into France's Vanoise National Park, and together they form one of the larger protected complexes in Western Europe, spanning roughly 1,250 square kilometers as a linked conservation zone. For a close-up version of the park, drop into the Cogna side and follow the water. The Lillas Falls are a good example, a series of drops with a total height of about 150 meters, loud and cold and bright against dark stone. They're not just pretty, they're proof of gradient, of meltwater, of how quickly this landscape moves when the temperature shifts. Nearby, the park keeps a different kind of archive at the Paradiso Alpine Botanical Garden in Valmonte, founded in 1955, sitting around 1,700 meters. It holds about 1,000 species of mountain plants, and even the name is a clue drawn from a local lily, as if the park wanted to remind you that paradise here is not metaphor, it's taxonomy. Gran Paradiso works best when you let it set the tempo. You walk a little slower. You scan the ridgelines. You start noticing the things that don't announce themselves, the scrape of hooves on rock, the sudden silence that means something large just moved out of sight, the way a valley can feel inhabited even when you don't see a single person. This isn't an Alps Greatest Hits postcard. It's a sanctuary that earned its status the hard way, and it still feels like a place where nature is allowed to finish its sentences. And when we leave Gran Paradiso, we're not leaving the Alps behind. We're carrying their blueprint forward because Italy doesn't stop at mountains. Next, the story pivots again into the next kind of wonder on our trail. Our next destination is Venice and its lagoon. And the first thing you feel coming from the Alps is how violently the world can change over a short distance. We drop out of high rock and cold air into a low tidal basin where the horizon flattens, the light turns milky, and the land starts behaving like water. Because Venice isn't sitting in the sea. It's sitting inside a lagoon, and the lagoon is the real wonder. The Venetian lagoon is roughly 550 square kilometers, stretching for about 50 to 55 kilometers along the northern Adriatic, and it's astonishingly shallow, with an average depth often described as less than a meter across huge areas. It's separated from the open Adriatic by barrier islands, including Lido and Pellestrina, and it breathes through 3 openings to the sea: the inlets of Lido, Malamocco, and Chioggia. That simple geometry is everything. It's what makes Venice possible, and it's what makes Venice fragile. From above, the lagoon looks like a living circuit board, deep channels carrying tidal flow, broad mudflats that appear and vanish with the water level, salt marshes, Bearina, that sit right at the edge of existence, absorbing wave energy, filtering water, and acting as nurseries and feeding grounds in a habitat mosaic of marsh, seagrass, wetland, and open water. And then, in the middle of that shifting system, you have a city that decided to build anyway. Venice is an engineering gamble that worked for centuries. Heavy stone buildings supported by forests of timber piles driven into clay, with platform layers above them. Studies on Venetian foundation wood identify a small set of species, like alder, larch, oak, pine, elm, used for those submerged elements. The quiet trick is the environment itself. Waterlogged, oxygen-poor conditions can slow decay dramatically, which is why timber piling has historically survived for long periods below groundwater levels. This entire landscape, city plus lagoon, was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Property in 1987, and the listed site covers 70,176.4 hectares. That matters because it frames Venice correctly, not as an isolated jewel, but as a system. A city, yes, but also marsh, barrier islands, waterways, and the shallow breathing space that keeps the whole thing alive. And this is where Venice becomes more than romance. It becomes physics. The lagoon's water level doesn't rise only because of normal tides. High water events, aqua alta, are the result of multiple forces stacking on top of each other: astronomical tide, storm surge, and basin-scale oscillations and fluctuations in the Adriatic. In Venice specifically, storm surge is strongly tied to wind forcing over the Adriatic, especially Sirocco events, and combinations involving Bora and Sirocco patterns. Add the long-term background problem, relative sea level rising because of both sea level rise and subsidence, and you get a city where flooding stops being rare drama and starts becoming a calendar. Venice has been fighting this battle for a long time, and the most Venetian detail isn't a palace or a church. It's the way the city historically treated the lagoon like a machine that needed constant tuning. Renaissance Venice developed deliberate strategies to keep channels navigable and to manage silting, because if the lagoon filled in, Venice didn't just lose beauty, it lost function. Modern Venice has its own signature intervention. MOSE, the mobile barrier system placed at those three inlets, Lido, Malamocco, Chioggia, designed to temporarily close the lagoon off from the Adriatic during extreme high water forecasts. The gates first protected Venice in October 2020, a milestone that felt like the city finally putting armor on after decades of argument and delay. But even that is a reminder of the core truth. You can't solve Venice without also changing how the lagoon behaves, because the lagoon needs flushing, sediment, and exchange to stay healthy. So when you stand in Venice, whether you're looking across the lagoon from the Lido, gliding down a canal, or watching the water creep into the lowest stones, you're not just seeing a beautiful city. You're seeing a negotiated truce between land and sea. A civilization built on mud, held up by timber, defended by barriers, and still dependent on marshes and tides behaving just enough, like they always did. And after Venice, the trail pivots again. We leave flat water and engineered survival behind, and we follow the coastline southwest to a different kind of edge of the world, where villages don't float, they cling. Let's take a look at Cinque Terre National Park, and after Venice's flat, tidal world, this coastline feels like someone tilted Italy up on its edge. The Ligurian shore here is steep and tight. The mountains don't politely step back from the sea. They run straight into it, and the only way humans ever made a home on this kind of terrain was by doing something stubborn and brilliant, carving the slopes into terraces and then building towns that cling to the folds of rock like they grew there. Cinque Terre is one of Italy's smallest national parks, but it's also one of the most intensely inhabited, protected landscapes on Earth. The park was established in 1999, and it covers roughly 3,868 hectares. And inside that protected boundary, you still have real communities, about 4,000 residents spread across the 5 hamlets: Rio Maggiore, Manarola, Corniglia, Vernazza, and Monterosso al Mare. UNESCO frames the bigger idea perfectly. This stretch of coast, linked with Porto Venere and nearby islands, was inscribed as a World Heritage Site in 1997 because it's a cultural landscape where the layout of the towns and the shaping of the surrounding terraces basically tells a continuous story of people adapting to a steep, uneven coastline for around a millennium. Now, the terrain isn't just dramatic, it's also unstable. The Cinque Terre sits in a landscape of fractured rock and steep gradients, and the park itself is often cited as a classic sandstone flysch coastal landscape, layers that can weather into sharp ridges and crumbly slopes, the kind of geology that looks stunning and then reminds you it's always in motion. That's why the wonder here isn't only the villages, it's the engineered relationship between people and gravity. Those terraces aren't decorative, they're infrastructure. They slow runoff, hold soil in place, and create narrow strips of land where vines and olives can survive on a slope that would otherwise slide into the sea. When those terraces are maintained, the land holds. When they're abandoned, the hillside starts trying to return to its original state fast. And that's the tension you feel everywhere in Cinque Terre. Beauty that exists because someone kept repairing it, generation after generation. The park has a blue lung, too. Right off this coast is the Cinque Terre Marine Protected Area, established by ministerial decree on December 12, 1997, covering the sea in front of much of the park. It includes protected zones around headlands like Punta Mesco and Capo Montanaro, where the underwater terrain drops hard and the coastline turns into cliffs, both above and below the waterline. On land, the ecology shifts by altitude and exposure. In the hotter, drier zones, you're in classic Mediterranean scrub. Myrtle, mastic, strawberry tree, and patches of holm oak. And the park notes how the region's microclimates diversify vegetation, with maritime pine, Aleppo pine, cork oak, and chestnut appearing where conditions allow. Along the coast itself, you get plants that look built for salt and sun, like sea fennel and the caper bush. The animal life is quieter than the Dolomites or Gran Paradiso, but it's there if you stop scanning only for villages. The park highlights small mammals in the scrub, things like hedgehogs, badgers, weasels, martens, and it points out that the cliffs host birds that actually make sense for this geography. The peregrine falcon on inaccessible rock faces, plus seabirds like Mediterranean gulls and cormorants working the updrafts and currents. The classic connective spine is the Sentiero Azzurro, the Blue Trail, running between the villages as a sequence of sections. It's often described as about 12 kilometers end to end, but it's not easy coastal strolling in the way people imagine. You're constantly gaining and losing elevation on stone steps and narrow paths, and the park's own trail notes make it clear. Many segments assume real footing and experience, and closures happen. The most famous piece of the whole system is Via dell'Amore, the Path of Love, a short cliff-hugging walkway between Rio Maggiore and Manarola, about 900 meters, built into the rock above the sea. It's iconic because it's visually simple: railings, cliff, water, and a straight shot of coastline that feels too perfect to be real. And it's also become a case study in what happens when a fragile place becomes globally famous. Today, access is managed with reservations and timed entry, with caps like 200 people per 30-minute slot, because this coastline can't absorb infinite foot traffic without consequences. Cinque Terre, more than almost anywhere else in Italy, makes the geology feel literal. The land is the author. It dictates where you can stand. The slope dictates where you can farm. The sea dictates how you travel, And the villages aren't cute coastal towns in isolation. They're the visible tips of a whole system of terraces, trails, and coastal engineering that had to exist for people to stay here at all. So when you look at Vernazza's harbor curve, or Manarola stacked above the water, or Corniglia perched higher than the others, don't read it as a postcard. Read it as adaptation. This is what 1,000 years of living on an impossible coastline looks like when it succeeds. And from here, we leave the sea again. Because Italy's story doesn't run on one axis. Next, the trail turns inland into Tuscany, into a city that concentrated art, finance, politics, and invention so tightly it still radiates outward through history. Next stop. Our next destination is Florence, and after Cinque Terre's cliff-lined villages, this feels like Italy turning inward, from sea salt and terraces to a river city that learned how to turn geography into power. Florence sits in a bowl of Tuscan hills, bisected by the Arno, and UNESCO makes a point that matters. The setting has stayed recognizably the same through the centuries. The river is still the city's spine, the hills are still its frame, and the historic center still reads like a compressed map of what the Renaissance became. The why here starts with the river. The Arno is Tuscany's main artery, rising in the Apennines and running west across the region toward the sea. And Florence grew around one of the most practical crossings in this whole interior corridor. Britannica notes that the city's founding logic was tied to controlling that crossing and the routes toward the Apennine passes. In other words, this wasn't destiny. It was placement. And then came the second layer: money, guilds, trade, banking, and an urban machine that could fund ambition at scale. By the time the Medici rose, Florence had the infrastructure for influence, and UNESCO describes it bluntly. Florence became the symbol of the Renaissance and rose to economic and cultural preeminence under the Medici in the 15th and 16th centuries. That rise still hangs over the city in one dominating piece of geometry, the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore. The church itself anchors the skyline, but it's the dome that rewires your brain the first time you see it in person, because it doesn't look like a roof. It looks like a solved problem. The Opera del Duomo describes Brunelleschi's dome as an octagonal structure in stone and brick with an interior diameter of 45.5 meters and an external diameter of 55 meters, built as a double-shell dome with 463 steps running up through the space between those shells. That's not just architecture, that's engineering as a declaration. And Florence keeps doing this to you. It takes something human-made and makes it feel geological. Walk away from the Duomo and the city immediately starts showing its materials. UNESCO calls out traditional building fabrics like pietra forte and pietra serena, plus plasterwork and frescoes, stones and surfaces that became part of Florence's visual grammar. You start seeing the city as layers: stone, pigment, shadow, and then the river glinting through gaps, like a reminder that all of this sits on water and sediment and time. Follow that pull and you end up at the Arno, where Florence's most famous crossing still holds the line, Ponte Vecchio. The Visit Florence monument notes say the current bridge was rebuilt after a flood in 1345. It was built close to the old Roman crossing point, and it's repeatedly proven how resilient it is, including withstanding the weight and force of the Arno's flood, November 4th, 1966. That 1966 flood matters because it snaps Florence out of museum city mode and back into reality. Italy's Civil Protection Service frames it as the flood of Florence of November 4th, 1966. And the images from that event are the kind that permanently change how you read a beautiful place. Water in the streets, mud in the churches, cultural heritage turning fragile in a single night. It's a reminder that Florence's elegance is not immune to the same forces that built it. Now, Florence doesn't just preserve art. It preserves the idea that governance and culture can be fused. The Uffizi literally embodies that. The official Uffizi site notes that the gallery occupies the first and second floors of a large building constructed between 1560 and 1580, designed by Giorgio Vasari. It was designed in 1560 for Cosimo Prende Medici to house the Grand Ducal magistratures, government offices, and over time it became one of the world's defining art collections. One building, two identities, administration below, legacy above. UNESCO's World Heritage listing for the historic center of Florence, inscribed in 1982, ties the whole picture together by naming the key anchors outright: Santa Maria del Fiore, Santa Croce, the Uffizi, the Pitti Palace, and the extraordinary artistic activity that made Florence a reference point for centuries. That inscription isn't just a badge. It's a way of saying, this city isn't famous for one monument. It's famous because the density is absurd. And that's the Florence experience in a sentence. You don't come here and tick off sites. You walk through a place where the river dictated a crossing, the crossing attracted wealth, the wealth funded ideas, and the ideas were turned into stone, paint, and public space, so convincing that the world still uses Florence as a measuring stick. From here, we leave the city's tight concentration of genius and step into a Tuscany that feels almost like the opposite: wide, rolling, and deliberately shaped. Next stop. Our next destination is Val d'Orcia, and if Cinque Terre was Italy clinging to cliffs, this is Italy, learning how to compose a landscape. You've seen this place before, even if you've never been here. Those soft, rolling hills, the cypress lines like exclamation marks on the horizon, farmhouses sitting alone on crests like they were placed there on purpose. That's because, in a very real sense, they were. UNESCO lists Val d'Orcia as a cultural landscape not because it's pretty, but because it's a working countryside that was deliberately reshaped in the 14th and 15th centuries when it became part of Siena's agricultural hinterland. The goal wasn't just productivity, it was an ideal, a visual statement of land management, defense, and Renaissance ideas of order to create what UNESCO bluntly calls an aesthetically pleasing picture. And the raw ingredients for that picture are right in the terrain. Val d'Orcia is a valley of fields, farms, trees, and woodlands, broken by low hills with towns and villages perched on top, exactly the kind of topography that makes you feel like you're moving through a living painting. But look closer, and you'll see the land's harsher side too, especially where vegetation thins. This region includes badlands landforms shaped in clay-rich sediments, where runoff bites into the slopes and leaves ribbed, eroded textures. In parts of the Orcia Valley, research describes Biancane badlands tied to Pliocene sea clay outcrops. The beauty here has teeth. Now drop the botany into the frame and it clicks. Cypress isn't native everywhere in Italy, but here it became part of the visual language of Tuscany. Wheat fields and pasture land shift color by season. Vineyards and olive groves stitch the lower slopes. Even the empty spaces feel intentional, like the landscape is giving your eyes room to breathe. Val d'Orcia also sits on an older spine of movement, the Via Francigena, the ancient pilgrim route that runs roughly 3,200 kilometers from Canterbury to Rome, crossing Europe and pulling travelers south at walking speed. In this valley, that route becomes a slow-motion tour through the most iconic Tuscan geometry. And then come the human punctuation marks. You have Pienza, the Renaissance ideal city, rebuilt under Pope Pius II with architect Bernardo Rossellino, a town designed to embody humanist planning principles in stone and proportion. You have hilltop strongholds like Montalcino, sitting high enough to read the whole valley like a map. And you have one of the strangest, most cinematic places in all of Tuscany, Bagno Vignoni, where the main square is literally an enormous 16th century rectangular thermal pool, hot water rising right in the middle of town, fed by springs used since Roman times, with the water then flowing down toward the Parco dei Mulini below. Val d'Orcia is the moment in our Italy trail where you realize something. This country doesn't only preserve monuments, it preserves entire relationships between people and place. A valley shaped by governance, agriculture, and aesthetics. A landscape famous for beauty, but maintained like infrastructure. And a region that proves nature and culture don't always sit in separate boxes. And from here, we follow that pilgrim gravity south. Because the Via Francigena doesn't end in Tuscany. It keeps pulling toward the city that has been pulling the world for 2,000 years. Next stop. Our next destination is Rome, and this is where the Italy Trail stops being a sequence of beautiful places and turns into something heavier. A city that doesn't just have history, it manufactures it, layer on layer, until the ground itself becomes an archive. Rome begins with a simple geographic trick. A river you can work with. The Tiber is not the widest river in Europe, not the gentlest, not the neatest, but it's enough. It gives you a route inland, a water supply, a floodplain to farm, and a crossing that matters. And around that crossing, the city rose on a cluster of defensible heights, the Seven Hills, Palatine, Capitoline, Aventine, Caelian, Esquiline, Quirinal, Viminal. Small on a world map, enormous in their consequences. That's the first feeling Rome gives you, topography as strategy. You can stand on one rise and see another rise and understand how settlements could grow into a single organism. But Rome isn't just built on hills, it's built on materials, and the materials explain a lot of the city's permanence. This is volcanic country Italy. The wider region is full of ancient ash, tuff, and stone that can be quarried and shaped, and that geology fed Rome's engineering mind. The Romans perfected concrete using pozzolana, volcanic material mixed with lime, to create a hydraulic binder that could set strongly, even in demanding conditions. It's one of the quiet technologies behind the loud monuments. You feel that engineering mindset everywhere, but nowhere more than in the way Rome solved the most basic urban question: water. Long before the city became marble propaganda, it became a machine for moving resources. The Aqua Appia, begun in 3012 BC, is recorded as the first Roman aqueduct, an early move in what would become an aqueduct network that let Rome grow beyond what local springs and the river could reliably provide. And once you see that pattern, capture water, channel it, distribute it, you start noticing that the same impulse runs through everything. Roads, sewers, bridges, forums, baths. Rome is a civilization of systems. Then the monuments hit. The Roman Forum is the easiest place to understand Rome as a living engine rather than ruins. This was not one building. It was the central zone where politics, law, religion, and public life collided for centuries, constantly rebuilt, repurposed, and reinscribed by whoever held power next. Even in fragments, you can still read the logic. Processions, speeches, courts, decisions, human life arranged into stone corridors. And right beside it, the Palatine rises like a reminder that power prefers high ground. And then there's the Colosseum, less a building than a statement that the empire could bend labor, logistics, and architecture into spectacle at industrial scale. Even when you've seen it 1,000 times on screens, the in-person scale resets your sense of what public meant in ancient Rome. But if one structure captures Rome's genius in a single, clean idea, it's the Pantheon. Inside, the dome still feels like an impossible calm. The interior diameter is about 43.3 meters, and the height to the oculus is the same. Geometry that turns space into a perfect argument. It remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome ever built, and it has no steel skeleton hiding inside it, just Roman material science, weight management, and confidence. When the light drops through the oculus, the building stops feeling ancient and starts feeling alive, like Rome is still performing physics in real time. Rome's other defining trait is that it doesn't stay in one era. It stacks. You can stand in a single line of sight and move through centuries without walking. Imperial stone, medieval brick, Renaissance facades, 19th century interventions, modern traffic. Even the river itself carries that story. For much of Rome's life, the Tiber was both lifeline and threat. And in the modern era, the city answered that threat with heavy infrastructure, embankments, and river regularization projects that reshaped how Rome interacts with its own riverbanks. That tension between what the landscape wants to do and what the city demands it do sits behind the Rome experience. Because Rome isn't just old, it's contested. It's been fought over, rebuilt, rebranded, and reinterpreted for 2,000 years. UNESCO captures that scale by listing not just Rome as a postcard, but the historic center of Rome as a whole system, first inscribed in 1980, then extended in 1990 to include wider protective boundaries and key sites, ensuring the city's layered values are represented as one connected heritage landscape. And that's what Rome is in the Era Trail sense, a place where geography becomes destiny, where volcanic dust becomes concrete, where water becomes politics, and where architecture becomes memory you can walk through. But we're not done with Rome's world yet, because the next stop takes us to the most violent punctuation mark in Italy's ancient story. We leave the Eternal City and head south toward a coastline where the ground didn't just preserve history, it froze it in ash. Next stop. From Rome, the land tilts toward the south, and Italy's story starts speaking faster. The air warms, the light gets sharper, and then the Bay of Naples opens up like a stage. Blue water, crowded hills, and one shape that refuses to be background scenery. Mount Vesuvius doesn't loom like a mountain, it waits like a verdict. What hits you first is the contradiction. This is a living volcano wrapped in ordinary life. Roads, homes, vineyards, traffic, yet its slopes still carry the scars of fire. And they're not barren either. Vesuvius is a stubborn ecosystem, Mediterranean scrub, broom thickets, and a surprising botanical inventory. Hundreds of plant species, including orchids, with the yellow blooms of broom becoming one of the volcano's signature colors. That living edge is part of why the area became Vesuvius National Park in 1995, a formal attempt to protect not just views, but an active landscape that keeps rewriting itself. And then you remember what you came here to face, because below that volcano are the places where time got trapped. In 79 CE, Vesuvius erupted with a violence so complete it didn't just kill, it preserved. The best-known date in older histories is late August, but newer evidence, including a wall inscription dated after mid-October, strongly suggests the disaster likely struck later in the year. Either way, the human account survives. Pliny the Younger, watching from across the bay, describes a rising cloud like a tree, daylight collapsing into ash darkness, and panic spreading faster than anyone could run. This is where Pompeii enters like a frozen breath. Pompeii wasn't a small ruin field. It was a full Roman city, laid out in blocks and neighborhoods, shops, temples, fountains, bakeries, bath complexes, and streets grooved by cartwheels. The archaeological area spreads across roughly 66 hectares, with a huge portion already excavated, enough that you don't visit Pompeii so much as you walk inside it. And as you move through it, the details don't feel grand at first. They feel human. Charcoal marks, faded election notices, household shrines, dining rooms with painted walls, meant to impress guests who'd never exist again. Pompeii's destruction was, in part, a long terror. Ash and pumice falling, roofs collapsing, streets turning into chutes of debris. But the final killer wasn't drama. It was physics. Hot clouds of ash and gas, pyroclastic flows, dense enough to pour through the city and steal the air out of lungs. That's the blunt truth of how volcanoes kill at scale. And then there are the shapes. In Pompeii, the voids left behind by decomposed bodies became a grim archaeological signature, spaces in compacted ash that could be filled. From 1863 onward, the site used the casting method perfected by Giuseppe Fiorelli to create the forms that still stop visitors mid-step, people caught in the exact posture of their last second. It's not museum horror. It's a reminder that history wasn't made by marble statues. It was made by lungs, skin, fear, and ordinary mornings that didn't stay ordinary. Then, just a short distance away, Herculaneum shows you a different kind of ending. Pompeii is vast and street level. Herculaneum feels like a cutaway through a buried world. Here the city was hit hard by the hotter, denser flows, buried deeper, sealed tighter, and that brutal speed created a strange outcome: better preservation of organic material. In places you find carbonized wood still where it belonged, doors, beams, even furnishings, like the town wasn't ruined, just abruptly switched off. It's also why Herculaneum can feel more intimate. Balconies, upper levels, tighter lanes, and homes that read less like monumental ruins and more like interrupted living rooms. And then there's the treasure that shouldn't exist at all. At Herculaneum lies the Villa of the Papyri, still partly buried under the modern town, famous for its ancient library. The site's own documentation is blunt. Much of it remains underground, even though 18th century tunnels mapped parts of it, including a floor plan drawn up in 1754. This is the kind of detail that makes the place feel unreal. A classical world not only preserved but still locked. Texts, rooms, and objects sitting in darkness, waiting for the next careful incision of archaeology. And hovering above all of it is Vesuvius itself, still the author of this entire chapter. Walking the crater trails isn't about conquering a mountain. The summit is modest compared to the Alps. The impact is psychological. You circle the rim and see the crater like an open wound in the earth, with the Bay of Naples spreading out beyond it. Beautiful, dense, and vulnerable. Downslope, the vegetation keeps returning. Pioneer species taking lava and ash, and turning it back into soil, broom thickets painting the hills, life insisting on a foothold. Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Vesuvius don't just teach you Roman history. They teach you what Italy does better than almost anywhere. It stacks eras on top of each other, beauty over danger, daily life over catastrophe, until you can feel time as a physical thing beneath your feet. And when we leave this volcanic shadow behind, we don't leave the coastline behind. The road keeps tracing the edge of the sea, toward cliffs, lemon groves, and towns clinging to stone. Next, the Amalfi coast and Capri, where Italy leans hard into the Mediterranean, and the land starts doing that thing it does here, mountains that refuse to step back from the sea. The Costiera Amalfitana isn't just pretty coastline. UNESCO lists it because it's a complex settlement landscape, a tight, steep world where climate shifts with every fold of terrain, creating an unusually wide range of habitats in a small area, and where human life had to adapt to rock, slope, and exposure instead of flattening them into submission. And the geography makes that instantly legible. The backbone behind the villages is the Monti Latari, a coastal mountain range that forms the spine of the Sorrento-Amalfi Peninsula. Even today, a protected belt, the Parco Regionale dei Monti Latari, covers much of this ridge system, tying together the inland heights and the cliffside coast in one continuous landscape. This is karst country, limestone and dolostone, fractured and waterworked, where cliffs break sharply, valleys cut deep, and slopes can be brutal. It's the kind of geology that creates drama for the eye and difficulty for anyone trying to build a life on it. So the Amalfi Coast's real signature isn't just vertical villages, it's terraces, the human answer to gravity. UNESCO describes the landscape as rocky areas, wood and maquis, and citrus groves and vineyards, grown wherever people could find a viable patch of land. And that isn't poetic language, it's literal. On these slopes, agriculture became architecture. Dry stone walls, stepped platforms, and manual cultivation built and rebuilt for centuries. That relationship is so culturally intact that the Amalfi Coast's terraced system, especially the lemon-based landscapes, has been recognized as a heritage agricultural system, highlighting the steep terraces, dry stone walling, rainwater harvesting, and low-impact cultivation that protects soil and water while sustaining livelihoods. Now, if you want to feel this coast rather than just photograph it, you climb. Up on the ridgeline, the famous Sentiero degli Dei, the Path of the Gods, runs like a balcony above the Tyrrhenian, a point-to-point trail that threads between mountain villages and hanging viewpoints, with the sea spread out below you like polished metal. And down below, the coast tightens into coves and inlets, some of them so narrow they look like the land was split open. The Fiordo di Furore is one of those cinematic cuts, an inlet carved by a torrent that opens to the sea, often called a fjord even though it's not glacial in origin. Still, the effect is the same. Cliffs closing in, water funneling through rock, and a tiny beach caught in the middle of it all. The plants keep changing as you move. Sun-baked slopes carry Mediterranean scrub and hardy shrubs. Shadier folds hold thicker growth, and then, tucked away from the coastal glare, the Amalfi coast hides a completely different world, Valle del Ferriere. This valley is greener, wetter, cooler, crossed by clear water and waterfalls, with ruins of old ironworks and mills that once used the river's force as industrial power. It's also famous for something that feels out of place this far south: the ancient fern woodwardia radicans surviving here in a humid microclimate like a living remnant from another era. And this is the Amalfi Coast in a nutshell. One coastline, but many climates: sun, shade, ridge wind, sheltered valley damp, stacked right on top of each other. Then you hit the villages, and the human story takes over again. Positano climbs instead of spreading. Amalfi itself carries the memory of a seafaring identity. It was the capital of the Duchy Maritime Republic of Amalfi, a Mediterranean trading power for centuries, long before tourism turned the coastline into a global shorthand for beauty. And through all of it, the same theme repeats. You're watching a society engineered around cliffs, built to survive and prosper inside a landscape that never offered easy ground. But the Amalfi Coast is only half the spell today. Because just offshore sits Capri, a limestone island that looks like it was sculpted for myth. Approaching by boat, Capri rises fast. Pale rock, steep faces, dark cave mouths cut into the shoreline. The island is famously karstic, limestone shaped by dissolution and wave action, so the coast is full of cavities, arches, and sea caves that feel less beach and more cathedral. And then you see the island's most iconic punctuation marks, the Faraglioni. 3 sea stacks close to Capri's southern coast, each with its own name: Stella, Faraglione di Mezzo, and Faraglione di Fuori, Scopolo, rock spurs rising straight out of the water, like the coastline broke into monuments. This is wave erosion made theatrical, and it gives Capri that instantly recognizable silhouette: stone teeth in blue water. Capri's other famous trick happens in a cave. The Blue Grotto is a sea cave where sunlight enters through an underwater opening and reflects upward through the water, filling the cavern with an unreal blue glow. It's not dye, it's optics and geometry and clear seawater doing what they do when the angles are right. And above all of it is the island's high point, Monte Solaro, 589 meters above sea level, the best place to understand Capri as a whole, with the gulfs of Naples and Salerno opening out in every direction when the air is clear. Capri also carries an older, quieter weight, Roman power seeking distance. The most famous remnant is Villa Jovis, the cliff-edge palace built for Emperor Tiberius, completed around 27 AD, part of the network of imperial villas that turned Capri into a retreat with a view and a moat of sea. Standing there, you feel the island's logic: isolation as luxury, elevation as control, and the Mediterranean as both protection and spectacle. Even the man-made paths on Capri feel engineered to flatter the landscape. Via Krupp, built between 1900 and 1902, zigzags down the rock face in tight switchbacks, less a road than a deliberate line drawn through the cliff, proving once again that in Italy, even transit can become art. So the Amalfi Coast and Capri land like a double exposure. One is a lived-in coastline, terraces, villages, microclimates, and old industries tucked into green valleys. The other is a limestone shard offshore, sea stacks, grottos, high viewpoints, and a long history of people coming here to look out over the world and feel slightly removed from it. And when we leave this coastal dream behind, the trail doesn't get calmer. It gets bigger, because next, Italy hands us another volcano, one that isn't a single catastrophic moment in the past, but a living mountain that keeps remaking its island in real time. Next stop. We leave the salt-bright glamour of the coast behind, and Italy changes tone. The air gets drier, the light turns sharper, and then, almost like a mirage made out of limestone, we arrive at Matera, a city that doesn't sit on the land so much as it sits inside it. This is one of those places where you understand the geography in one glance. Matera clings to the edge of a deep ravine, the Gravina, and the old city spills down toward it in layers, as if the rock itself decided to become architecture. Across the gap, the landscape opens into the Murgia, a calcareous highland plateau cut by fissures, caves, and those steep ravines the South calls gravine. And the miracle here is that people didn't just build a town in this terrain, they carved a life into it. Matera's ancient heart is the Sassi, a rock-cut settlement where homes, workshops, storerooms, and streets stack and interlock in a way that can feel impossible at first. A staircase that's also a roof, a lane that runs over rooms hollowed into stone, a doorway that opens into darkness that has held human breath for a very long time. The Sassi and the surrounding rupestриan landscape is an outstanding example of a rock-cut settlement, perfectly adapted to its geomorphological setting, with continuity stretching over more than 2 millennia. That continuity isn't abstract here. You feel it in the details. You feel it in the rough texture of the local stone, soft enough to carve, strong enough to endure. You feel it in the way churches appear where you don't expect them, tucked into cliff faces, half hidden in the folds of the ravine, their entrances plain and humble, until you step inside and find frescoed walls that look like they've been holding on to color out of sheer stubbornness. Because Matera isn't just the Sassi, it's also the park of the rupestриan churches, and that wider plateau world matters. The surrounding protected landscape, the Murgia Materana Park, was established in 1990, and it's famously dense with rock-cut sacred spaces. Over 150 rock churches, each with its own iconography and architectural quirks, shaped by centuries of cultural overlap in southern Italy. So the city becomes a conversation between two sides of a gorge, the carved districts of the Sassi on one side and a plateau on the other that's riddled with caves, ravines, and sanctuaries, an entire region where spirituality, shelter, and geology keep sharing the same physical space. And then there's the problem every stone city in a dry landscape has to solve: water. Matera solved it the hard way by engineering an underground world. Below the modern square of Piazza Vittorio Veneto, you can step down into the Palombaro Lungo, the city's largest public cistern, a vast, vaulted chamber designed to store water at scale, over 5 million liters, according to local descriptions, part of a wider tradition of capturing rainwater and channeling it into hidden reserves. It's one of Matera's most distinct revelations, a place that looks ancient and poetic from a distance, but up close is also brutally practical. Survival architecture, tuned to climate and scarcity, refined over centuries. And the story doesn't pretend to be neat. In the 20th century, the Sassi became a symbol of extreme hardship, overcrowding, disease, poverty, and in 1952, a special law, Law 619, often associated with De Gasperi, mandated the evacuation and relocation of thousands of residents out of the Sassi. That's the knife edge in Matera's identity. The same cave city that now reads like a masterpiece of human adaptation was also, not that long ago, treated as an emergency, something to empty out in the name of dignity and modernity. And then, because Italy has a talent for reinvention, Matera returned. UNESCO inscribed the Sassi and the Park of the Rupestrian Churches of Matera as a World Heritage Site in 1993, recognizing its cultural and landscape value. Decades later, Matera was chosen as a European Capital of Culture for 2019, turning the city's once-forgotten stone districts into a stage for renewal without erasing the scars that made the place what it is. And while the stone dominates your attention, the wildlife is quietly present too. Out on the Murgia, the landscape can feel almost steppe-like in places, open, sunlit, wind-exposed, and above it you can sometimes spot the falco grillaio, the lesser kestrel, a small raptor that's become the symbol of the Murgia Materana Park, nesting in and around the city and hunting across the plateau. So Matera ends up feeling like 3 stories layered into one. A geology story, limestone and ravines shaping everything. A human story, a city carved into rock, abandoned, then reclaimed. And a system story, water engineering, terraces, caves, and churches, an entire settlement logic built around adapting to a landscape that never makes anything easy. And then comes the shot you almost always remember. You cross to the far side of the ravine or climb to a viewpoint on the Murgia, and you look back at the Sassi. In evening light, the city turns pale gold, windows glowing like embers inside stone. And for a moment, Matera stops being a place you visit and becomes something older, a reminder that humans have always tried to outsmart time by building inside the things that last. And from here, our trail pivots again, out of the ravines of Basilicata and toward a different kind of power entirely. Because next, Italy brings us to an island where the ground is still writing its own story in real time. Next stop, From the stone-dark caves of Matera, we push farther south until the map stops being a boot and becomes an island. Sicily doesn't feel like an extra chapter of Italy. It feels like a whole other continent that just happens to be tethered by a narrow strip of sea. And then, almost immediately, Etna starts owning the horizon. This is a volcano built near a major plate boundary, where the African plate is being forced beneath the Eurasian plate. Sicily sits right in that tension zone, and Etna is one of the ways the Earth vents its pressure here. Etna isn't a sleeping giant type of mountain. It's famous for being intensely active, with near-continuous activity at the summit and frequent lava flows from fissures and flank vents. Humans have been documenting its behavior for at least 2,700 years, which is part of why UNESCO listed it as a living showcase of geological processes happening in real time. Up close, the landscape flips between worlds. Fresh lava fields are black and sharp, like the planet is still cooling. Older flows soften into slopes where life learns how to begin again. Scrubby vegetation, then forests, then whole ecosystems stitched across ash and stone. Etna's protected area exists partly to guard that strange timeline. Recent lava where nothing has settled yet, and much older terrain where pine, beech, and birch have had time to take hold. And those birches matter. On Etna, there are endemic birch formations, Etna birch stands, limited roughly to the 1,200 to 2,000 meter band, clinging to old lavas in the colder exposures. A pale, northern-looking tree surviving on a volcanic mountain in the Mediterranean is exactly the kind of contradiction Sicily loves. Even the wildlife feels like it's learned to live with instability. The park documents mammals you wouldn't expect on a volcano: porcupines, foxes, wildcats, martens, hares, and bats, moving through forests and rocky margins and using lava caves and broken terrain as shelter. And because Etna is so active, access is managed with reality in mind. Summit access can be restricted or outright prohibited for safety, and movement is controlled across key zones. This is not a mountain you conquer. It's one you're allowed to approach on its terms. Then Sicily pivots, hard, from volcanic wilderness to cinematic elegance. Taormina sits above the Ionian Sea like it was placed there for a wide establishing shot. And at its heart is the ancient theater, originally built by the Greeks in the 3rd century BC, then reshaped under Roman rule, eventually transformed into an arena-like space in the 3 century AD. This is architecture with layers, the same way Etna is geology with layers. But the theater's real trick is the backdrop. From its stone seats, the view can frame the sea, the coastline, and Etna's massive cone. Beauty sitting in front of power, as if Sicily is reminding you that art here has always been made under a volcano's shadow. And then, below Taormina, the coastline turns jewel-bright. Isola Bella is a small island set just off the beach, tied to the mainland by a thin ribbon of sand when the sea allows it. It's been a nature reserve since 1998, protected not just for the view, but for what survives there: Mediterranean scrub, marine habitat, and botanical pockets that carry local endemics. The reserve covers only about 10.49 hectares, but it holds species with names that sound like they were coined by poets, like Limonio ionico and the Taormina cornflower, living their small, stubborn lives in salt air and sunlight. That's eastern Sicily in one breath: fire underfoot, history in stone, and water like polished glass, all coexisting, all refusing to simplify themselves. And from here, with Etna's presence still lingering in the sky behind us, we leave the mainland-facing edge of Italy and head for the island that closes our journey, Sardinia. We end our Italy trail by crossing into a place that feels slightly detached from the mainland's rhythm. An island with its own weather, its own tempo, and a kind of stubborn, ancient personality. Sardinia is the Mediterranean's second largest island, and it carries itself like it knows it. The coast can look almost unreal, water so clear it feels too clean for the real world, but the moment you step back from the beaches, you start noticing what Sardinia is actually made of: rock, wind, and time. Up in the north, around Gallura, the landscape becomes a sculpture garden built by erosion. At Capo Testa, the granite is carved into strange, rounded forms and honeycombed cavities, boulders shaped like faces, animals, ruined statues, especially around Valle della Luna, where the coastline turns into a maze of pale stone and coves. And between the rock, the Mediterranean maquis pushes through, aromatic scrub that survives heat, salt, and relentless sun. This isn't pretty geology. This is Sardinia's core identity. Because beneath the postcard coast is an island with a geological history that stretches back hundreds of millions of years. Sardinia, as a fragment of older Europe, reshaped again and again through deep time. Research on Sardinia's geology describes a long sequence of processes across more than 500 million years, and in the northeast, a major Variscan granitoid batholith around 300 million years old underpins the landscape you're looking at. And then, Sardinia delivers the final era trails pivot, where the natural world and human time suddenly lock together. We head to the island chain off the northeast coast, the La Maddalena Archipelago National Park, a geomarine park established in 1994, spanning land and sea, with about 180 kilometers of coastline and dozens of islands and islets. Most of them are uninhabited, and that's the point. Wind, currents, and salt get to keep doing their work without too much human interference. From the water, the archipelago looks like scattered stone thrown into blue glass, granite outcrops, pale beaches, shallow lagoons shifting from turquoise to deep cobalt. Places like Caprera and its coves, Cala Coticchio especially, feel less like a beach and more like a natural basin carved for swimming, ringed by warm-colored rock. And under the surface, the Mediterranean is quietly doing something more important than looking beautiful. Posidonia oceanica, a seagrass unique to the Mediterranean, forms underwater meadows that support marine life, stabilize coasts, and store carbon. They're also fragile and easily damaged by anchors and coastal pressure, which is why protection here matters. Then Sardinia turns inland, because it's not just coastline. The interior rises into the Gennargentu Range, where the island's highest point, Punta la Marmora, reaches 1,834 meters. It's a different Sardinia up there: cooler air, harder light, big open slopes, and a sense that you're standing on the island's spine. And finally, Sardinia reminds you it has its own ancient civilization, older than the Rome you just left behind. Across the island, you find nuraghi, Bronze Age stone towers and defensive complexes found in forms unique to Sardinia. The most famous is Su Nuraxi di Barumini, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a fortified complex begun in the 2nd millennium BCE, occupied for centuries, and recognized as the best-known example of this Nuragic architecture. That's the closing chord of Italy for us. Not marble, not domes, not Renaissance perfection, but an island where granite becomes coastline, where wind sculpts stone into faces, where the sea hides living meadows, and where prehistoric towers still sit in the open air, refusing to explain themselves. Sardinia doesn't feel like the end of a journey. It feels like the moment you realize the journey was never just Italy at all. It was time, layered, and you got to walk through it. And that's Italy, when you follow it the Erythrail's way. We began in the Dolomites, where ancient seas became mountains, and we stepped into Gran Paradiso, where the Alps still hold on to real wilderness. We drifted into Venice's Lagoon, a city balanced on water and engineering, then clung to the cliff-line logic of Cinque Terre. We crossed into Florence and watched genius become stone, rolled through Val d'Orcia where countryside turns into composition, and arrived in Rome, where time stacks until the ground itself feels layered. Then Italy reminded us it isn't just beautiful, it's alive. Vesuvius froze whole cities into history. Amalfi and Capri turned cliffs and limestone into myth. Matera proved humans can carve survival into rock and still find a way back from hardship. Etna kept writing the island's story in real time, with Taormina watching it all from a perfect vantage point. And Sardinia closed the journey with granite, wind, and deep time, an island that feels older than the narratives we try to place on it. Italy doesn't resolve into one image. It keeps changing its mind, and that's the point. If you enjoyed this journey, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It genuinely helps Erythrails keep making documentaries like this. And tell us in the comments, where should we go next? Thanks for traveling with us. Until the next trail.